We good? Okay. All right. Good evening. I'm Carol Robertson. I'm welcoming you here to this climate series talk tonight. I am a member of the UUTC, and I'm also on the board of Conserving Carolina. As you guys know, the UUTC does a lot of things besides the climate change kind of talks. They're very active in the community, and Conserving Carolina is also very active in things like the Acosta Trail, a lot of buying land, getting conservation easements, and different involvements in the community. Tonight we have Matty, who is an AmeriCorps member for Conserving Carolina, and Maureen Copelof, who's the mayor of Brevard, giving us our presentation. So that's all. At the end, we'll have opportunities for questions. If you're watching online, supposedly there's a way that you can type in questions and we'll get those. So I'm going to turn it over to Matty. There you go.
Thank you very much. All right. Everyone hearing me okay? Awesome. Thank you. All right. So like she said, my name is Matty. I'm an AmeriCorps member with Project Conserve, working with Conserving Carolina and the Transylvania County Cooperative Extension, which is just down the block from here. A little bit more about Conserving Carolina. We help people protect their land forever. We protect places like forests, farms, and the land around rivers and streams. By protecting these places, we are protecting habitat for the plants and animals that are important to the natural heritage of Western North Carolina, and we're helping to keep that area and our water clean. Our conserved lands also store tons of carbon dioxide, which help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lessen climate change. Additionally, many of the properties that we help protect are open to the public for recreation, like hiking and mountain biking and such. Can we go to the next slide, please? Awesome. Here's a short introduction to what we're going to be talking about today. It was in the title, but we're going to be talking about climate change and exactly what's going on with that, the who, what, how, and why behind climate change. We're going to be talking about climate resilience, what it is and how it plays out in the real world. We're going to be talking a little bit about what Conserving Carolina contributes to that, and then we're going to have Mayor Maureen Copelof talk a little bit about what Brevard is doing. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with an important quote from Stephen Hawking. He said that the polar ice caps are shrinking and the desert areas are increasing. At night, the Earth is no longer dark, but large areas are lit up. All of this is evidence that human exploitation of the planet is reaching a critical limit. Unfortunately, he was right, and the planet has already reached a critical limit. It is no longer about reduction of climate change causes, although we should still aim for that. It is now about preparing for climate change effects like rising sea levels, flooding, fires, etc. And there is a way to prepare our infrastructure that we may have already seen in the real world, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. So a little bit is going to be doom and gloom of climate change, just the facts about it, but we're going to try to focus on the positive of what we can do. Next slide, please. So just wanted to start off with assuaging any rumors and just talking about facts. I'm going to define what exactly climate change is. So climate change is the change in average weather patterns in a region over a long period of time. These changes can be natural or anthropogenic, which means human-induced. Just going to verify that a little bit more. Climate change is not equal to global warming. Those are two totally separate things. They do play into each other, but they're two different terms that cannot be used interchangeably. Global warming means that there's an increase in the average surface temperature of our planet. In our current period of global warming, there's been a well-documented rise of average temperatures around the globe since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. Basically, global warming is changing climate processes. Global warming leads to climate change. They aren't the same thing. More extreme storms, heat waves, droughts, regional temp and precipitation changes, shifting vegetation zones, melting glaciers, sea level rise, all happen because of global warming. To sum up, as the planet warms, climate changes. And then some causes for that are changes in the orbit, changes in the atmosphere, tectonic plates shifting and moving, and greenhouse gases, which we all know about and love. Does anyone have any questions so far? No confusion about changes in climate change and global warming? No? All right. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Okay. So we're going to talk about why we should care about climate change before we move on to some more in-depth causes. Why do you all believe that we should care about climate changes?
I had kids.
Yeah, we care about our future.
I have a grandkid.
Yeah, we care about the future and the future of our bloodline. And that future cannot sustain itself if we keep seeing sea level rises and drought and more frequent and severe weather. So while these are already here, it may be time for our generation and the people here now to address climate vulnerability and resilience. Cutting greenhouse gas emissions is one place that we can start. We can cut out carbon dioxide as much as we can, reduce how fast the threat grows, and help lower future long-term risk. That's a great place to start. But we should really be addressing both climate threats and vulnerability as our most effective strategy to reduce overall risk. So let's talk about one of those risks, ecosystem changes, which we see a lot here in Western North Carolina. Ecosystems on land and in the ocean have been and will continue to be disrupted by climate change. Animals, plants, bacteria, and viruses will migrate to new areas with favorable climate conditions. This can even include infectious diseases in certain species that are able to inhabit areas that they couldn't previously. And COVID is a great example of that, something that has taken over in a new area despite what we might have thought. Is anyone surprised by that? How COVID could be interrelated with climate changes? Yeah. If anyone is, or if anyone watching at home is a little bit confused on how those two are related, as we have to move farther away from coastal areas and farther away from areas that receive extreme heat levels, we are getting pushed closer into cities and into areas with higher population levels, which is how infectious diseases can be spread so quickly. So it may be tangential, but there's definitely some interrelatedness there. And also, there are some things that we depend upon and value that are experiencing the effects of a climate change. We depend on water, and that's being changed. We depend on energy, transportation, wildlife, agriculture, ecosystems, and our own health. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so I wanted to get into some major climate players and discuss a little bit who is affecting climate changes the most. So this figure up here shows the countries with the largest cumulative emissions from 1850 to 2021. At the top of that list is the United States. Is anyone surprised? No. So in this figure, we're focusing on cumulative emissions over a period of time because there's a direct linear relationship between the total amount of CO2 released by humans and the level of warming at the Earth's surface. So basically, the timing of that CO2 being emitted only has a limited impact on the amount of warming it will ultimately cause. So even if there was a huge oil spill tomorrow, yes, that would have a huge impact on us now, but it would have an even bigger impact in the future. This means that CO2 emissions from hundreds of years ago continue to contribute to the heating of the planet, which is why oftentimes we talk about the Industrial Revolution and the impact that that had on the CO2 levels of our planet. And current warming is determined by that cumulative total. This graph shows, just to explain a little bit further, the green where it says land is CO2 emissions as a result of land use and forestry. And then the gray, which is fossil, is obviously fossil fuels and cement. Does anyone have any questions relating to the graph? Can we get a microphone over there if anyone's...
Can you talk about how Germany went into the negative with their land emissions?
Yeah, so Germany is someone that I looked into a lot when it came to climate resilience. They've tried really hard to have a net zero impact on CO2 emissions. You can go into it further by researching it yourself, but that's a base level there. They've basically retroactively changed how much they're emitting, and that's like set off their cumulative total. So that's how they're in the negative. Good question. Anyone else? All right, we can go to the next slide. So oftentimes the people that are releasing the most CO2 and having the most effect on climate changes are not the ones that are affected the most. In this graph, we can see exactly who's being affected the most. This is taken right from German Watch's observatory via the Global Climate Risk Index. So basically, each of these countries had a climate risk index which was close to 0, meaning that the closer the number is to 0, the worse that area is affected. Is anyone surprised by these? We've heard a lot about Puerto Rico in recent years and the hurricanes that have hit them hard. I personally was surprised to hear about Pakistan. I thought it would be landlocked. In my head, I was like, what's affecting that? But there have been some crazy monsoons that have caused damage in Pakistan every year. And its impact was felt even more in 2010, which affected 20 million people. And then not included on that list, just because I didn't have enough space, was Japan, which has an index of 5.5, meaning that it's very high risk just because of where it's at. Can anyone tell me why they might think that Japan is super high on that list? It's actually number 1 of the areas most affected by climate changes. Yeah, they have a lot of coastline, and especially where they're located, they can be really affected by tsunamis, earthquakes in the ocean reaching them, stuff like that. So obviously the pattern that we can glean from looking at this map is that although the countries that are the primary contributors to climate change aren't the ones most affected by what's happening there, this obviously isn't fair, right? What's something that we can do to even that playing field, being the United States and having the power that we do, the economic power that we do? We can help those countries out. There have been a lot of grassroots organizations raising money for Puerto Rico after certain hurricanes affecting that area. And then I don't know of any that have happened in Japan, but hopefully through putting some more money towards climate resilience, we can help out those areas that are more affected. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just going to start off with explaining a little bit about climate resilience. So just to give a quick definition, resilience is relative. We must be resilient to what is impacting us the most. So for people in those coastal areas or low-lying islands, sea level rise and tidal flooding may be their biggest concern. They must be resilient to too much water, but in other areas like the western US, people need to be resilient to not enough water. Resilience is also dependent on that area's specific situation. For example, the decades-long financial crisis in Puerto Rico led to a level of infrastructure disrepair and physical and fiscal resource constraints that made it nearly impossible for that island to absorb or bounce back quickly from devastating impacts of Hurricane Irma. Meanwhile, New York City was also affected by a huge hurricane in 2012, Hurricane Sandy, but because of its infrastructure and money, everything was better staffed and better funded, so they were able to bounce back quicker. You can go to the next slide.
The steps to resilience allow you to address climate stressors within a comprehensive planning framework. Why should you care about climate resilience? More extreme events mean greater risks. Community leaders are stepping up and seeking help to build resilience to climate-related hazards. Resilience is the capacity of a system to retain essential functions before, during, and after a hazard strikes. Think of your community or business. You produce or provide something, which we represent with this dotted line. This is business as usual. When a hazard strikes, things might get disrupted, but you also might recover over time. But what if the disaster is severe? You might cross a tipping point and not be able to recover completely. Whether you've experienced a loss or anticipate one, the smart response is to increase capacity so that the next time a hazard occurs, you won't suffer irreparable harm. That's building resilience. A resilient system can bounce back completely. Here's the sequence that successful projects follow. Explore hazards. Assess vulnerability and risk. Investigate options. Prioritize and plan. And finally, take action. Whether you're doing all the work yourself or hiring experts, the steps to resilience keep you on track as you move from problem to solution. Ready to dive in? The steps to resilience allow you to address climate stressors within a
All right, so hopefully that video taught you a little bit about how resiliency is achieved. It was just a quick base level, and I'm going to touch on it a little bit further in our next coming slides about what specifically North Carolina has done. But first I wanted to talk about some barriers to climate resilience, since that video didn't talk about it. I have a few posted up here, but does anyone have any other suggestions as to what could be blocking climate resilience in our areas? Money, yeah. I was hoping someone would say that. I'm glad that's the first thing you thought of. So some surprising statistics. The federal government spends billions recovering from natural disasters, and that's not an exaggeration. From 2014 to 2018 alone, there were 63 disasters in the U.S. that cost more than $1 billion each, and total damage was more than $500 billion. This is more than double what we saw within the last 35 years. So I hope you're asking yourself the question, well, why don't they just put money into climate resilience? That's easier said than done. As we know, and people who are involved in government know, there's a lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of papers to sign and things to write up before you can jump to that part. Essentially, funding for climate resilience, as we know of it right now, is not taken out of emergency funding. It's just funneled in through everything else. So it basically goes through regular congressional budget meetings. It's thrown in there with other measures like national security, veterans affairs, hospitals, farm loans, etc. And it has to compete with all of that, which might be kind of difficult when we're looking at an issue that's happening right now, like school systems, or something more pertinent that we actually care about, like gas prices. I know it's a big thing on everybody's mind. So we're not exactly thinking about, oh, what about this future natural disaster that hasn't even happened yet, that we could put money towards to prevent damage. That might not be the first thing on everyone's mind. So what we must do now is make those in charge of congressional funds start seeing the importance of climate resilience. So some ways to do that are to focus on what we might have already done city-wise or state-wise, and then present that in a condensed format to federal employees. You can go to the next slide. So here I have some examples of what North Carolina has already done, and then you can see it on the map. The first one is Asheville, which is right above us here. So in Asheville, interestingly enough, Asheville and its surrounding counties are becoming known as safe cities. So people are starting to migrate here, which we might have already seen. Rentals are disappearing, people are buying up houses, and your first thought might not be, oh, they're moving here to escape climate changes, but that's exactly what I did. I moved out of Florida because it was getting too hot, whether I did it consciously or subconsciously, and then came here to somewhere that had a more temperate climate. And that's actually happening a lot. While we want to be welcoming, this influx of people is kind of getting above our limit. Between 2010 and 2019, Buncombe County's population rose to more than 260,000, which is nearly 10 times the national percentage. And that's really not surprising because of where Asheville is located. Relative to coastal areas, it is high ground outside the rising sea level's path of destruction. Sea levels are rising enough to displace as many as 13 million coastal dwellers, and where are they going to go? Asheville seems like a safe place. And that total is another surprising statistic, more than double the so-called migration of African Americans who fled racial bigotry in the South. So that's more than double that. And people in the deep South are fleeing as well because, like I said, it gets too hot in the summer. So what has Asheville done if we're talking about climate resilience measures? They have already started that process of the climate resilience tools that we saw on the last slide in the video. They've explored the hazards. So they asked themselves, what are the hazards that we're facing in this area? Mainly in Asheville and Western North Carolina, the only hazard is heavy precipitation. It rains a lot, and we have flooding. And there's some temperature variability, but that's about it. So they explored the hazards. They assessed vulnerability and risk. So they assessed which areas are going to have the most risk if a flooding event happens. And most of that was community services. So the next step that they took was investigating what they can do about it. So there's some ongoing but thorough collaboration and broad applicability. A plan's gonna be made. They're in the process of doing that. But a long-term plan will be difficult because we have to consider future climate migrants like I already talked about. So city planners out in Asheville are planning for this, but it's gonna take some time to see exactly how many people are gonna end up moving to this area. But Brevard is gonna be affected by that as well. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Sandhills County. So kind of in the middle of the state, and their main issue is dealing with heat and heat illness. So some research was done, and a former graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill, Maggie Sugg, developed a pilot instrument called the Heat Health Vulnerability Tool, which uses National Weather Service heat index forecast to predict the number of emergency department visits, which is pretty cool. So it basically analyzes the temperature and then spits out a number of how many people might visit the hospital at that time if it's a heat-related illness. And then that tool can also be used to decide when to send out a heat warning to vulnerable groups and provide info about cooling centers and other steps towards preparedness, which is a pretty cool thing that they're working on out there. And then lastly, we have the Outer Banks, specifically Nags Head, which is at the northern area. So Nags Head has been a huge proponent in climate resiliency in North Carolina. They're hailed as the early visionaries when it comes to climate resilience. They have been planning and dealing with complex coastal issues since 2015. and have been actively enacting change in that area to prepare them for that. They have also implemented a tool called the Vulnerability Consequences and Adaptation Planning Scenario Tool in open public planning, which engages community members like yourself and seeks their input on potential coastal hazards. So based on the results from this tool, the town was able to establish a committee that was completely dedicated to coastal resiliency, and that happened in 2016. And they were able to prioritize over 160 possible adaptation actions into a report. So they have tons of data, and they're totally ready to start enacting some change in that area. One of the first things that NAG's Head is going to do is they're going to coordinate with the University of Georgia and Stetson and map out potential damage from storms and sea level rise to understand and visualize consequences and investigate legal and policy barriers to adaptation. So they're using the data that they've gathered from community members and then putting it together in order to do something with it, which is pretty awesome. We can go to the next slide. So we're going to take a quick look at what Conserving Carolina is doing. So we're going from a more broad to an even smaller level, and then we'll get to just Brevard in a minute. You can go to the next slide. So, some things that Conserving Carolina is doing. They are investing in solar panels. So they have installed solar panels on the roof of the Hendersonville office with help from donors and an energy solutions company. And they have switched to ESG investments. These are investments that have a bundle of funds that are responsible from an environment, social, and government standpoint. So in recent years, there's been a huge shift in the world of investing towards these funds that are more responsible for our planet. In April, Conserving Carolina joined hundreds of other nonprofits in endorsing the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. This act put a price on carbon and gave the money back to the American people. And this act would also create jobs and save lives. You can go to the next slide. Conserving Carolina has also taken an inventory of their greenhouse gas sequestering. So they've taken inventory of their footprint and also developed strategies to help reduce it. And they have taken a poll of how much carbon is sequestered in their conserved lands. So they've accounted for how much carbon they are saving from being released into the atmosphere. You can go to the next slide. So what can you do? Here are some actions that you personally can do to start helping your area perform some climate resilience. You can vote. You can hold the government accountable. And if you want, you can join the push for nonpartisan climate action. Conserving Carolina recommends getting involved with the grassroots Citizens Climate Lobby. There you can find some more information about how to get involved with some more grassroots efforts involving climate resilience. You can also donate to different conservation efforts. I might recommend Conserving Carolina, might be a little bit biased, but I will admit they're doing some great stuff in this county and Henderson as well. There are some natural climate solutions that can provide up to 30% of the emissions reductions that we need. And by supporting Conserving Carolina, you're protecting forests and natural areas that store carbon already. You're also restoring wetlands that reduce flooding, and you're expanding migration corridors so wildlife can adapt. If you want to find out more about what Conserving Carolina is doing, you can check out their website after this. And you can also invest. You can ditch fossil fuels and create a habitat. If you have a retirement account or other investments, you can talk with your advisors about moving your investments out of fossil fuels, like we talked about earlier, and moving them into ESG investments. And lastly, you can solarize. You can consider the power of the sun to power your home and electronics and stuff like that. While solar power doesn't work for every home, It's worth exploring, and there's tax incentives and financing, and the reduced cost of solar panels may make it a good investment for you. So you can check out all these things, and you can also do more personal level climate resilience, but that's a pretty good place to start. And that's the end of my little section, and I'll have Maureen come on up here and give her section. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Matty, and thank you, everybody. Can we bring up the next slide with, yeah, and the next one after that? I think everybody knows me, who I am. You know, when I look at, you know, climate hazards and I look at, you know, resilience, you know, you see the big picture, and sometimes that big picture really is almost overwhelming. So the question I'm always asking myself as mayor, and before being mayor as a member of city council, is what can I do as an elected official in a small municipality in western North Carolina that would really make a difference? And so, you know, the first thing is you have to look, as Matty had said, what are really the hazards that we face here? And when you think about it, you know, air pollution is a hazard everywhere. We have the changing seasons, which we've seen, and those seasonal changes really do impact. They impact our plants, our environment, our, you know, our whole habitat. Landslides, water, rain, landslides, mud, flooding. I mean, we are constantly here in the city dealing with water issues. You know, you drive anywhere in the city, you can see flooding, you know, is an issue, and it's just getting worse. And of course, the impact on all of our wildlife and our ecosystems, because we are so fortunate living here in western North Carolina, living in the mountains, living in such a beautiful natural environment, that we need to really keep in mind, how do we protect that for the future? And so, you know, we look at, you know, what is threatened? Well, obviously our public health is threatened. Safety, you know, all of these things can impact safety. Our quality of life is impacted. Economics are impacted. And really, of course, our recreation. And you know, that again goes right back to the economics. So then, how do we deal with this? You know, how do you deal with so many issues? Well, we look at our toolbox, and what do we have as a municipality that we can do? And this is something I ask myself almost every day. What can I actively do that would make some type of difference? So the tools that we have, we've grouped them into 5 little categories. And the first one are regulations. Now, that's something that some people will say, well, we don't have enough of. We need to regulate more. And then on the other hand, we'll hear from a lot of people, oh my God, you've over-regulated. You have way too many regulations. So the real challenge as an elected official with regulations is really trying to make sure we have the balance, that we're regulating, but we're not over-regulating, and that we're also, in addition to regulating, that we're using other tools in our toolbox. And so one of those other tools is really green space. We are very, very fortunate here that we have a lot of natural green space which helps our environment. So what can we do? We can obviously increase the amount of green space. We can improve the green space that we have. We can invest in more green space. We also need to look at our infrastructure. Do we have infrastructure that can hold up and really, really deal with the changing environment that happens? Do we have, you know, the sewer system that can handle, you know, flooding? Do we have, you know, water management? How do we deal with the floodplains? You know, how do we have, make sure that we're only allowing building in areas that can handle it, that we're not causing more problems? So it's important that as a municipality that we continue to strengthen and that we continue to build out that infrastructure. it's also important that we stress sustainable habits. And I have to say, probably the best example of this is the city partnering with Blue Zones. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Blue Zones, and what are they doing? They are teaching us how to live in a healthier, more active way, and they are always stressing movement, walking, biking. You know, they're not stressing cars, they're stressing other alternatives. They're stressing habits that we've gotten out of, being used to. We drive 2 blocks. I try to walk into City Hall every morning. If it's really bad weather, sometimes I cheat and I drive, but I really do try to walk and say, I'm helping. Every little step forward makes a difference. And the last thing that we can do is we can model resilience in what we do. Next slide. Okay, and now I want to talk a little more in detail of each one of these tools. I talked about regulations. Well, some of the regulations we have, I'll mention, is dark sky compliance. Now, we're not all the way there, not at all. But it's something we think about, and it's something that, we'd love to achieve. It's a little too far right now, but we have lots of regulations in terms of lighting, in terms of how tall you can put a light, how much spillage there can be of the light, around. So we are slowly, trying to get people when they develop, especially when they're building or replacing something, to say, how is the lighting on this going to impact? So it's a step in the right direction. We have standards for large developments, okay? You've got to have so much green space if you're doing a large development.
First, past climates could have changed because of...
Oh, wow. You've got to have trees in your parking lot. We are adding trees to the roadways. So a lot of the development standards really try to take in and try to mitigate the impact that increased numbers of people, increased density, as Matty said. We are getting climate refugees here in Brevard. I mean, I have met so many people from the coast and from the West Coast coming to get away from the fires now we are having the problem of we're building denser, closer, more, into the city. So how do we make sure we have those standards in place that we regulate that type of development so that we do protect our environment and, obviously our community? We also regulate the plantings. We want to have native plants. We want plants that are really healthy for this ecosystem here. And so we have a list of invasive plants, which you are actually not allowed to plant. We don't mandate that you have to plant native plants, but we encourage it. And I tell you, every time I meet with a developer, what do you think one of my first questions is? Because if you know me, I've been out planting native plants across this city. And so I will ask them, what are you planning to do? How are you going to landscape? What are you putting in? Is it native to here? Is it really going to help, help with our community? So these are some of the regulations that we have. We also have regulations on steep slopes, okay? If it's more than a 25% slope, you're not allowed to build. So we're trying to protect, because we know with the increasing weather events that the more building we have on these slopes, the more problems that can cause. We have regulations in terms of building in our floodplains. And we're looking at that again because, of course, that 100-year floodplain, it's not 100 years now. It's a whole lot more often than that. So things are changing. One of the things we're doing as we look at regulating resilience is we are developing our comprehensive land use plan. And this is something, and I should have introduced her earlier. I have an absolute expert with me here. I've got Emily Brewer from our planning staff. Emily, you want to come up here and get on camera? People can see you. Emily is one of our assistant planners, And this is actually her area of expertise. So I brought Emily so that she can answer all the hard questions, for one thing. But one of the things that is really great with our planning department is we are looking at the entire landmass of the city. When I talk, I'm talking Brevard. So we have taken every single parcel of land in Brevard, like 7,000 or something. Yeah. Correct me if I get my numbers wrong, Emily. And we've said, okay, what is there now? But then we said, in the future, what is the best use of this land? Where do we want development to happen? Where is it going to hurt if we develop? Where do we want to maintain green spaces? Where do we want these parks? Where do we want industry? And so how do we balance all of that? And so that really that's land use planning that is going on right now. We're going to have a new plan that is going to guide the development and the growth of our city until 2030. Yes. And I think it's supposed to be done by the August timeframe. Okay. Yes. And there's going to be public input sessions coming up, I think, in late spring, right?
Yes, yeah. We're getting ready. We're getting ready to release a priority survey. So our consultant is really hard at work getting this together to be able to say, this is everything we've learned from your documents, from your plans, from talking to people. We want to make sure we're on the right track as we start to really think and dig into this a little more in a nuanced way. So we're looking forward to that, and it's important for us to hear everybody's priorities as we start to think about what Brevard is going to look like in the next 10 years. So as the mayor was talking about, it's really important to have your voices be a part of this as we look to the resilience and sustainability of our entire community.
Mm-hmm. See where I brought her? Okay. Don't go far, Emily. So we really are. Regulations can do a lot, okay? One thing I will say I'm very proud of is we are a Tree City USA. We have been a tree city for 33 years. Now, some people will point out that some of our trees are dying. Okay? We need to replace our trees, and we know that. And we have 20 new trees that are going to be put down along Caldwell Street, to sort of deal with that, what has become just a corridor of traffic. And so we're trying to re-landscape that. Some of what we're doing also is looking at how to replace a lot of those trees downtown, because we really want that downtown tree canopy to, not only for aesthetics, but also because of the heat index. It's so much cooler when we have those trees, in the center of downtown. But it's challenging because trying to find trees that, one, can survive in an urban environment, can grow when you've got all of your utilities and things underneath, you've got sidewalks in the way. It's a very slow, it's lengthy, and it's an expensive process to replace and put those trees in and really put them in places where they can thrive. So that's a lot of what we are doing with regulations. The next thing that we are doing, and maybe bring that back up, is we're looking at green space. And I have to say that one of the things I'm proudest of is how the city has really been focusing on green space and how to maximize it, how to reinvigorate it. If you look at our depot, our railroad depot, and if you looked at that area 3 years ago, what was there? Nothing was there. It was a barren lot full of gravel and nothing. So what is there today? Well, now there is a native plant garden with over 60 different types of native plants that, we have transformed that piece of green space. And we continue to work. We work with Conserving Carolina, who has very nicely helped us with the stream bank there, maintaining the stream bank and doing some restoration on the stream banks. So again, trying to preserve that green space and extend it. We have The tannery, which is an area, it's a brownfield that the city purchased. And if you're not familiar with a brownfield, that's an area that was contaminated by industry. And so the ground in the tannery does have contamination. And it has only very limited uses that you can have. But one of the uses that we can do is we can build a trail through there. And we can keep it as a green space with a trail. And so we turned what would have been a completely unusable area into something that is good for the community, but it also will maintain that space really as a green space for quite a while. So we really have been looking at where we have green spaces, where we can create more green spaces, and we work with every developer that comes up. I'm happy to say, we have a new hotel that's going to be built on Broad Street. Well, that's a 3-acre lot, and that developer has promised that 1 acre of that will be green space. Now, it's not necessarily contiguous green space, but it will cumulatively be 1 acre out of that third will be green space. And that's a big deal in the center of town. So that's something that we really are doing. Improving our infrastructure. We have been working on our stormwater. You may have seen those big stormwater catch basins sitting on Railroad Avenue waiting to go in the ground, right? That's because we have flooding over on the streets, over on French Broad, on King. Those things are going to go in the ground, and that's going to help deal with the stormwater in that area of town. We also are getting ready to put in new stormwater infrastructure in the Times Arcade Alley downtown, which if you've ever tried to go to one of those shops during a heavy rain, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, that we need better stormwater infrastructure. When Brevard was built, this was not something they thought about. And so we don't have it in a lot of places. And so we are putting that in. We are trying to get our infrastructure more robust to be able to handle some of what is happening. But it's very expensive, and it's a slow process. But we are well on the way of doing that. Some of the other infrastructure improvements, we are installing LED lights, which is a program that I'm happy to say really was a partnership with the Sierra Club and I believe the Lions Club, who helped fund this initiative. So that is well underway. And we also have been upgrading our sewer system because, of course, when you get an awful lot of water and you have an old sewer system, where does that stormwater go? If it can penetrate into your sewer system, what do you think happens? Well, you have overflows because the sewer system can't handle it. And then you've got the increased problem, not only of all the water, but you've also have basically what we call a discharge of sewage happening. So we have been upgrading our sewer infrastructure, and you'll see that happening along Gallimore Road. That is the last, and then the system will be pretty well up to speed. So those are some of the infrastructure things that we've been working on. Next slide. Habits. Sustainable habits. Bike trails. We have been prioritizing bike trails. How many miles of bike trails do you think we have? Anybody? Bard? 10. Close. We have a little over 8 in the city. And our bike trail, you can go all the way from the railroad depot out to the Davidson River campground. And soon you'll be able to go to Main Street because you see the work along Railroad Avenue. Well, I mentioned we got to get those stormwater catch basins in. Those have to go in first, and then we're going to put the trail over them, and we're extending the trail. And we're doing this in a number of areas. We're also going to put that trail through the tannery. We're going to run the trails so they connect the schools. And we're starting to work on the Acoustic Trail. So we're trying to get people more used to be able to get to where they need to go by walking or biking. So if you can get to school, you can get to the school, to the stores. You don't have to be driving your vehicle everywhere. And every little step forward adds up. People say, well, it's just my car. I'm just going a few blocks. Well, everybody says that, and we all drive a few blocks. It does add up. We also have, we are installing our first electronic vehicle charging stations. We will have 4 of them in Clemson Plaza parking lot and 4 of them in the England Street parking lot across from City Hall. And those should be up and running by the end of April, I think. I think that's a good date. So again, takes money, but we are trying to make it easier for people to have electronic vehicles here in town. We also, as I mentioned, have Blue Zones working with us on really getting those lifestyle changes going on. And one thing I'm really excited about is there is a community group. It really is a grassroots movement that wants to get limiting single-use plastics here in town. And I am fully in support of that. They are actually working with Heart of Brevard because it's important that we have the buy-in with the business community. And so they're working with the Heart of Brevard, with the businesses, and I am really hoping that by April, they will be ready to come to me so that I can sign a resolution for the city encouraging, I can't legislate it because of North Carolina law, but encouraging the elimination of single-use plastics in our stores. And so that's something that we're working right now that I'm hoping is going to come out. And of course, we have our city recycling program, which we continue to push, but recycling is difficult because so very few places will take recycled goods these days. There's just no profit in it. So it really becomes a problem. And we're starting to try and encourage people, instead of recycling, try to reduce the amount of waste that you have to begin with. And finally, we have modeling resilience. And of course, when I started 4 years ago, one of the first things I said to the city, I said, why can't we have hybrid vehicles? Guess what? We have 6. Okay. That doesn't sound, I consider that a victory, okay? I consider we have 6 hybrid police cars. We buy 1 every year. We replace 2 police cars every year. 1 is a hybrid, 1 is a regular car. And so we are slowly. And one of the reasons is it took a while to get the police to test them out, make sure that they have all the performance characteristics that they need, which are still different than civilians, but we're getting there. So we actually do now have hybrid vehicles. If you look at Clemson Plaza, you will see permeable pavers, right? That water, like is happening out there right now. We want to start using permeable instead of the impermeable in the city because so much of that adds into the, our stormwater problem. So permeable pavers, first time the city's done it, right there in Clemson Plaza. Native plants, we have native plant garden now at the depot. We have one at the Tannery Skate Park and, at the dog park. We are putting in a new native pollinator garden at the dog park. We'll have a work day on April 30th, putting that in. And we also have just created a new community garden that is going to be available for people to really grow vegetables. So these are all the things that your city is doing, all of those 5 tools working together to try and move our community to deal with sometimes what seems to be almost an overwhelming problem. But when we look at it and we ask ourselves, what can we do as individuals? And Matty mentioned some of it, but you can also join in all of these things that the city is doing. You can use those bike trails. You can reduce the use of plastics. You can move and use native plantings. You can, encourage, you can participate in our land use planning. These are all things that our community can do together to really help build our resilience. So, thank you very much.
Do you want to stay up for a second and answer any questions?
Sure.
All right. Thank you for that. I learned a lot. I hope y'all did too. So we're we're just gonna open it up for questions from you all and anyone else in the live stream. Do y'all have any questions for us? Yeah. If you want to go up to the microphone, you can.
Yes, I'm interested in what strategies the city may employ to get people to use or put in solar panels. In other words, would there be such a thing as the leadership with the community buildings first, or tax breaks for people who have homes? Or I'd like to see a lot more solar panels.
Related to that, we're married and we're new to the community. We've been here 3 months, and we put solar panels on our house in Asheville. And my husband went to a meeting in our new development here again 3 months and got some pushback about it. So what I would like to hear strategies from either Conserving Carolina or from the mayor. How do you get these HOAs to be open to this? I'd like to hear your ideas.
Well, first, I will say, you brought up the one area I did not mention, okay? You noticed, we have been unsuccessful in having the city use solar panels on any of our buildings so far. And some of it has just come down, most of it has come down to cost, okay? Bottom line has come down to cost. We're a very small municipality. We don't do a lot of building. And when we did build, we're building one new structure, our new community center. I said, why can't we have solar panels on it? And a lot of different reasons, but it came down to it just, the position of the building, the way it would have to work, they'd have to stick way out. I had all these reasons why we couldn't do it, so we didn't do it. So the city has not, I'd have to say the city is not modeling behavior on solar panels because we don't have any city buildings. I'd love to see us start transitioning to that, and that's something I probably need to look into. Emily can write that down, and we'll look at it. HOAs are interesting because, you know, the city doesn't really control your HOA. The HOA has to comply with city regulations, but the HOA can really go much, much further in terms of regulating what they allow. And, you know, that's called, you know, free country. That's, that's the group decides what it is they want to have. So I don't have a way to get the HOA to change their policies from a municipal perspective. I have not looked into tax breaks in terms of solar. Okay, that's a good suggestion, and that's one Emily's writing down. So I mean, that's something we could look into because I think it is something that we need to really be pushing more. And I know some of the towns around here, I know Mills River has done solar on some of their new buildings, so it is possible. We just aren't there yet.
We have a question that I can answer, so.
Oh, okay,
Just take it
good.
up here with me. There was a question from the live stream. Who do we talk to in the city about their plant lists? That's me. So what's really wonderful about the planning department is that we actually have all of this information available online of our through our website. You can find the Unified Development Ordinance that has all of the different regulations. This does include what invasive species we're not allowing within the city. But then we also have tons of other examples of things, native plants that are included in some of our other city projects, and we would be happy to work with anybody on some of these items to make sure that we're really capturing this level of sustainability and resilience and making sure that we can support as much as possible. So me is my short answer, but long answer is we have a lot of other resources as well, and we're happy to work with you all on some of these items.
That brings up a question that I had actually while you were speaking. You mentioned that you're not requiring native plants to be planted, but you're encouraging it. Are you offering any incentives for that, for homeowners to plant native plants besides the beauty of them?
No, there's no monetary or, tax incentives for that. We really are encouraging, and often when I'm talking, some of the big developers in particular, people that are building the hotel, and the parking area. What is he going to plant in that acre of green space? But we tend to work more in a partnership on a lot of these. And what I have found is there's a real willingness by a lot of the developers that want to. They want to plant easy maintenance plants, which are natives. They require less water, less care, less everything. They want them to thrive. And so I have not really run into a lot of resistance when I've talked with developers and, I say something like, I'd really like to see native plants. We tend to get them. So it's not, you don't always have to regulate something. A lot of times you can just work more in partnership and sometimes get it better than if you tried to regulate it directly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
This is really for you young lady.
Would you be able to get over to the microphone, if that's all right? Just so the people that are live streaming can hear you.
I was just thinking, just one other follow-up to that question about solarizing, the verb that you used, that perhaps your organization could do a talk I could bring it up, they might not go with my idea, but I could always bring up an idea for our HOA to bring you in as a speaker, and then you could talk about the benefits. So that's what I was thinking, educating people, strategizing in that way. And I know that, HOAs want to have a certain appearance of their homes, and I understand that completely. But for example, our house, there's an area you wouldn't see the panels at all. And so I don't know, we haven't formally introduced it yet, so I don't know what their objection might be, but he did get some pushback just bringing it up. Mm-hmm. So would your organization be willing to do a talk if I could arrange that?
I can ask.
Very good.
Yeah, that's the only information I can give right now.
I guess.
If anything, I could give you some tools that you can take to them on your own. If Conserving Carolina says that I can't do something like
I
that.
can't imagine they would say no, because you're to
Yeah.
promote this education
Yeah.
throughout the community.
It's up to their will, honestly.
Sure, thank you.
Let me compliment you on the hybrid cars. That's a great idea. But that needs to be known. Somehow that has to be out, that the city is taking the leadership for having its police cars, every other one, hopefully every one eventually.
Yeah.
And anybody knows anything about hybrid cars, it's a fallacy to think they're not as performance oriented. In fact, EVs are even more performance oriented. And I've seen some cities actually have total EVs.
Wow.
As, more wealthier cities probably, but because of their acceleration. But anyway, I congratulate you on that, and having those infrastructure where you have the chargers around is a great idea. But this is kind of infectious. You start that, and people start like, I go to this men's group with the HOA we're in, and 2 or 3 of the people my age, old timers, are saying, I got an electric car in order. I got an electric car. Little Mini Cooper or a Volkswagen or something. Great, fantastic. And just the idea that the whole community is in favor of this is very exciting to me. So,
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah. We're proud of our little efforts, and really, the only way change really happens is people get to accept it as the norm. As I mentioned, trying to regulate change sometimes it's a very difficult proposition. And so trying to get people to understand, see change, and embrace it as something that's beneficial has really been a lot of what we try to do here in the city.
Change the word to incentivize.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because that would be great.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for coming. If you have any more questions that you didn't think to ask and you go home and you're like, oh, dang, I would have loved to hear more about that, you can email me. My email is right on the screen up there. You can also go to Conserving Carolina's website, and maybe you'll find the answer there, or someone of a higher power that you want to talk to. There are people above me who know more than I do, so they would love to talk to you about that. But yeah, that's about it. Thank y'all. Oh, and there are some resources in case you're curious about where I got my information from. And that's it.